Hello, my name is Ariel, like the mermaid, and recently there was a comment that someone put on one of my videos asking me to talk about the difference between romantic attraction and sexual attraction, and I thought that was a great idea, and I think I was kind of thinking about that before anyways. I think that it's an important thing to talk about when you're talking about issues of sexuality and romance. And I think that it's very important to talk about because I think there's an expectation in our culture that you're going to be sexually attracted to the people that you're romantically attracted. And for many people that's very true, including myself. I generally tend to be sexually attracted and romantically attracted to the same people, and both of those things kind of very much intermix with me. But for some people it's kind of very different. People generally talk, when they talk about, generally they talk about sexuality and romantic attraction like they're the same thing. Like we generally, if someone says they're heterosexual, we assume that they're also hetero-romantic. And similarly, if someone says they're pansexual, we assume they're pan-romantic. If they're bisexual, they're bi-romantic. If they're homosexual, they're also homo-romantic. However, this is not always true. Someone could be heterosexual, but be pan-romantic and actually have romantic potential with people who aren't of the opposite gender. Similarly, someone could be homo-romantic, mostly romantically attracted to people of the same sex or the same gender, but simultaneously be pansexual. There's all sorts of things. Could be homosexual but hetero-romantic, and sometimes it's hard to, especially since our society has certain expectations, it's hard to sometimes negotiate that, especially if you're sexually attracted to people who you aren't necessarily romantically attracted. Sometimes also, like, there's people who are asexual but might be homo-romantic or hetero-romantic or bi-romantic or pan-romantic, and there's also people who may be aromantic but are heterosexual or pansexual or bisexual or so many sexualities and romantic. But anyways, I think where we first have to start with this is what is the difference between sexuality and romance, or what's the difference between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. And when I was thinking about this video, I kind of realized that sometimes that's kind of hard to easily define, particularly as someone who tends to be, for me, sexual attraction and romantic attraction tend to go hand in hand with each other, and it's not always like that for some people. Now, of course, there are some people who I feel sexually attracted to that I don't really feel romantically attracted to, and maybe there could be someone who I feel some sort of romantic attraction to, but I don't really feel sexual attraction to. I mean, it's very possible, but in general, they go together for me. So let's try to define what is sexual attraction first. So sexual attraction, as I understand it, tends to be about it tends to be a little bit more about physical attraction, and it tends to be about attraction that has to do with your sexual desires, who you want to have sex with, in what ways you like having sex, what makes you sexually aroused, tends to have to do with sexual attraction. Whereas romantic attraction often has to do more with emotional attraction, who you feel an emotional love for, who you have a kind of a need for emotional intimacy with, who you have a need for emotional affection. It could be physical. Romance has to do sometimes with physical that isn't necessarily sexual, but it often has to do, when it is, when there's physicality and physical intimacy involved, it often has to do with not just satisfying a physical need, but also satisfying an emotional need. Now, what's kind of hard, though, is what physical acts are romantic and which physical acts are sexual. And I think it can very much differ for different people. I think for some people, kissing could be purely a romantic thing, and it fulfills a romantic need. But at the same time, sometimes kissing can be sexual and can be part of sexuality and part of fulfilling a physical need. Similarly, even hugging. Hugging we often, I think, associate with romance sometimes, but it also can just be non-romantic affection, but it can also be sexual. There can be some sort of sometimes hugging can get kind of, sometimes it can be kind of sexual, and you can be sexually aroused by just hugging people. Similarly, even sex, even sexual acts, generally we'd obviously be inclined to think that sex has to do with sexuality and sexual attraction. Obviously, that's the obvious assumption, but also sex can fulfill a romantic need, and sometimes people might choose to have sex with someone for romantic, to fulfill a romantic need, more so than to actually fulfill their own physical sexual needs. So I think what's important to remember is that sometimes it's for some people it's sexuality and romance are just completely intertwined, and who you're sexually attracted to and romantically attracted to are absolutely the same. And sometimes the line is blurry between what's fulfilling a romantic need and what's fulfilling a sexual need, and what's caused by your sexual desires and what's caused by your romantic desires. But I think it's important. Sometimes I think that's something that you have to. What is sexual and what is romantic often very much depends on how you perceive something, and what you perceive as the reason why you want to do something. And I think it's important to remember that just to understand that for some people it's not always the same. Sometimes that sometimes sexuality and romance is a little bit more complicated than we give it credit for, and some people have certain romantic needs that aren't really according to our kind of our norms about romance and sexuality, and some people have sexual needs that are very different from their romantic needs. And I think it's important, I think it's a thing when you're discovering your own sexuality and discovering your own romantic needs to be mindful of. What is something that you want out of romance? What do you want out of a romantic relationship? And what do you want out of a sexual relationship? I mean, and also, do you feel the need for a romantic relationship? Do you feel the need for a sexual relationship? Because not everybody does. Not everybody is romantically inclined, and not everybody is sexually inclined, and that's just how it is. There's different people have different needs, and that's absolutely fine. Anyways, I don't know if I did a very good job explaining all of that. Hopefully I did. If you have any questions, write in the comments if I fucked up and said something that's totally inaccurate, because, I mean, obviously I'm speaking from my limited experience. You can write that in comments, and we can have a discussion about it, and we can have a dialogue, and that's good.